Once upon a time, a merchant with his goods packed in many carts came to a desert. He was on his way to the country on the other side of the desert. The sun shone on the fine sand, making it as hot as the top of a stove. No man could walk on it in the sunlight. But at night, after the sun went down, the sand cooled, and the men could finally travel upon it. So the merchant waited until after dark and then set out. Besides the goods that he was going to sell, he took jars of water and rice, also firewood, so that the rice could be cooked. All night long, he and his men rode on and on. One man was the pilot. He rode first, for he knew the stars, and by them he guided the drivers. At daybreak, they stopped and camped. They unyoked the oxen and fed them. They built fires and cooked the rice. Then they spread a great awning over all the carts, and the oxen and the men lay down under it to rest until sunset. In early evening, they again built fires and cooked rice. After supper, they folded the awning and put it away. They yoked the oxen, and as soon as the sand was cool, they started again on their journey across the desert. Night after night, they traveled this way, resting during the heat of the day. At last, one morning, the pilot said, "In one more night, we should get out of the sand." The men were glad to hear this, for they were tired. After supper that night, the merchant said, "You may as well throw away nearly all the water and also the firewood. By tomorrow, we should be in the city. Yoke the oxen and start on." Then the pilot took his place at the head of the line, but instead of sitting up and guiding the drivers, he laid down in the wagon. And with the cushions, soon he was fast asleep. Because he hadn't slept in many nights and the sunlight had been so strong during the daytime, he hadn't slept well. All night long, the oxen went on. Near daybreak, the pilot awoke and looked at the stars fading in the light. "Halt!" he called to the drivers. "We're in the same place that we were yesterday. The oxen must have turned about while I slept." They unyoked the oxen, but there was no water for them to drink. They had thrown away the water that was left the night before. So the men spread the awning over the carts, and the oxen laid down tired and thirsty. The men too laid down. They said, "The wood and the water are gone and we're lost." But the merchant said to himself, "This is no time for me to sleep. I must find water. The oxen cannot go on if they don't have water to drink. The men have to have water. They can't cook the rice until they have the water. If I give up, we'll be lost." So, keeping a close watch of the ground, at last he saw a tuft of grass. There must be water somewhere below, or the grass wouldn't be there, he said. He ran back, shouting to the men, "Bring the spade, bring the hammer." They jumped up and ran with him to the spot where the grass grew, and they began to dig. By and by, they struck a rock, and they couldn't dig any further. Then the merchant jumped down in the hole, and he put his ear to the stone, and he said, "I hear water. I hear running water under this rock." He called to them, "We mustn't give up." Then the merchant came up out of the hole, and he said to the serving lad, "My boy, if you give up, we're lost. Go down and try." So the boy stood up straight, and he raised the hammer high above his head, and he hit the rock as hard as he ever could. He wouldn't give in. They had to be saved. So down came the hammer this time, and the rock broke, and the boy hardly had time to get out of the well before it was full of cool water. The men drank as if they could not get enough, and then they watered the oxen and bathed. They split up the axles and the extra yokes and built a fire and cooked the rice. Feeling better, they rested through the day. They set up a flag on the well for other travelers to see. And at sundown, they started again on their journey. And the next day, they reached the city. They sold their goods and they returned home. The end.